Welcome to the Pancake King Life and Marriage on the Spectrum, your source for learning about life and marriage on the autism spectrum. I'm your host, Forrest, and with me today I have a very special guest, Brant Hansen. Brant is the author of multiple books, including Unoffendable, Blessed Are the Misfits, The Truth About Us, The Men We Need, and his latest, Life is Hard, God is Good, Let's Dance. He is also the host of his own radio show, The Brant Hansen Show, and the podcast, The Brant and Sherry Oddcast. He is a man of many accomplishments, and I have him with us today to talk about some of his own experiences on the spectrum and how he works with that part of his life. So, um, Brant, I thought it'd be kind of cool to start off with this first question. It felt like the proper way to start is when were you first diagnosed on the autism spectrum?
Gosh, it was way before it was a thing, but it was as an adult. I think it's been 20 years. I think that's right, because or almost 20 years. So I was like 35 and I'm 54 now. So yeah, about 19 years ago.
Oh wow. Okay. So what was the age again? Was it 39 you said?
35, I
Oh,
think.
35. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So that is I wouldn't say like really late in your life, but definitely past childhood, teenage years, like young adult years, all those types of phases. So how did getting diagnosed affect how you like looked at your past up until that point? Did that help
Yeah.
contextualize certain areas? How did that work for you?
It totally did. And I'm really thankful for the explanatory power that it has, knowing as an adult. I don't know if I would want to know as a kid. I might. Um, but looking back, it explains so much. It continues to explain a lot. And it's helped me also, I don't know, relate to people better, I think. Like become aware of things more readily so that I adapt. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Did how did that view the future for you in that moment? Did the future seem scarier to you? Were you more confident? How would you say you were feeling in that moment?
Uh, it wasn't just a moment, too. It was more of a process and then an official diagnosis. But when I first entertained the idea of it, my wife actually was quite convinced of it, and I didn't really know much about it. And I feel like things are overdiagnosed, of course, and so I was skeptical. And then as I came to understand it, it seemed pretty obvious. So it really was a process, and I don't. It didn't make the future scarier. Honestly, it gave me some hope again because I could go, oh, okay, well maybe this I can explain things faster to people
Yeah,
if that makes
sure.
sense.
No, I guess it does. Um, what's that like to explain it to people? Can that be hard, or are people able to get it pretty easily? Because I'm aware that you have a tendency, like I don't think eye contact is something that you have a very big skill in. I take it.
Right. Totally. That's 100% right.
Yeah,
Um,
so I think they start to pick up on that when it's like, I wish I could make eye contact with you, but no,
yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
gonna
And
happen.
it's like I have this list of disclaimers I need to present people with when, like, if I'm starting work with a bunch of new people, I need to run through, like, okay, I may seem like this, but that's not really what's going on, just so you know. I may seem angry or impersonal. Uh, I saw a list the other day of stuff, sorry, of stuff that makes a person unlikable, a bad first impression.
Hmm.
And I think I checked off like seven of the eight things, um, which like you're supposed to make eye contact, you're supposed to smile easily. I've had to learn to smile, I've had to learn to make eye contact. But even if you're supposed to nod your head up and down to make yourself more likable, my head automatically, because of my eyes, nods no all the time. If I'm if I'm looking at something or if I'm not actively trying to stop it from nodding, from shaking my head. So like all of these things are that give the impression that I'm not interested or I don't like somebody or whatever. So yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
wow. So whenever you start a new job, do you pretty much had to like tell people right off the bat,
Yeah.
this is what I've got. So it's not something that you can necessarily slip yourself into and maybe not necessarily try to pretend that you don't have autism, but you just don't bring it up unless it's brought up.
Yeah, I bring it up. And I have to bring it up all the time in person too, because I speak to groups frequently. And so one thing I've learned from comedians who are really good is
Hmm.
when they start, they always self-deprecate. And so
Yeah.
I actually actively do that. I try to come up with some way to acknowledge, okay, I got this thing. Because people will also see me, like if I'm reading off, like I'm pointing at a screen, I usually don't use notes because as soon as I start looking at the notes, my head shakes like this.
Mm.
Even reading, like if I read from the Bible, uh, people are like, oh, he's disagreeing with the Bible. So I tell people that up front. And in a way, hopefully, it catches people a little bit off guard, but it lowers animosity. So I do that. If I'm with it, I have to acknowledge it because
Yeah.
otherwise, people are going to be wondering why is he shaking his head, or why does he have these odd mannerisms, or why does he seem so intense, or why is he blunt? So I like saying, and I like the fact that people generally now, if they're not on the spectrum, they generally know someone who is. They have someone in their family. They have some passing familiarity with it. So I'll even mention it on the radio. Like, hey, if you know someone who's is on the spectrum, you might get this show quicker than other people. You might go, oh, this reminds me of my little brother or something.
Mm.
So yeah,
It must be an interesting scenario if you're at a Bible study group, you got your Bible open and you're just shaking your head
100%.
as as you're reading it. Everyone's like, "What is he doing?"
100, that I've had that my entire life. You can imagine it. Every time I'm at Starbucks or at the grocery store, I'm putting the credit card in or and I'm trying to read the thing. They're always there.
Mm-hmm.
It's continual. It's like, what's the matter, sir? What's the problem? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people get mad about it. I've had people yell at me because they're literally they think I'm judging them or something. I'm not even thinking about them, but it's
Right.
strangers who do that. And like, bro, what's the problem, man? You don't like it? And I'm like,
Yeah.
what are you talking?
Yeah. Well, massive credit to you for continuing to go to Starbucks despite that. That
I
is
have,
some great courage.
well, okay, so it makes sense that I'm on the radio though, doesn't it? Like
It
so
does.
that
It
I
does.
can I can use whatever verbal capacity I have in a less threatening atmosphere. None of my body language things matter on the radio. It's wonderful.
Yeah, because none of these things I even necessarily knew about you because for the most part I'd just been listening to you or obviously reading your books and I'm not seeing your body language there. I think you
Hmm.
even said at one point I did a little bit of research on you before this just to get some other details learned, but you said at one point that at least on the radio you're not seen, so that really helps you to be able to pursue what you love doing without, I guess you could say the baggage of the body language stuff. So people aren't seeing that, they get to listen to you and therefore they get to quote unquote see the part of you that you want to have seen.
Yeah, those hurdles are gone. Because
It
again, I have to explain it to people, even like all the time, that I'm not
yeah.
mad, I'm not saying no. And to be able to just communicate ideas, which I hope are a blessing to people, or try to be funny or whatever, like and not have to do that every single time is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't mind me asking, then this wasn't even on the list, but honestly, you generate extra questions without trying.
Good.
What, what was that like? Having that sort of body language. What was that like in the dating scene? Like when you and your wife were dating, was that something you pretty much? Well, you weren't even diagnosed yet because you were diagnosed after you got married, right?
Yeah. I didn't date basically, and
Okay.
socially just didn't really know how to talk to girls, and also the body language stuff. And when we were in college, my wife and I were on a missions trip to Appalachia over the Christmas
Mm-hmm.
break, and we got snowed in with all our friends. And so we played board games and stuff, and she thought I was funny. So we were like I still didn't know like how to do that, but we hung out with each other like pals. And
Yeah.
eventually I just blurted out that hey, I said I love you while we were studying one night. I just blurted it out. And so that broke the ice on the romantic end of things. So literally that's she's my only girlfriend I've ever had. And we've been married 34 years now, but I never did figure out the dating thing. So she already knew by the time it turned romantic, she already knew what was going on with my body language. What she liked though was she thought I had integrity and she liked the honesty, the lack of flirtation. She was used to guys who were slick or tried to be, cool.
Hmm.
And so I was kind of a breath of fresh air. Like if she had met any guy on the spectrum, she probably would have thought the same thing. It was, you're probably this way too. You're not a flirt guy. You'll say the truth. But you have a hard time. You don't just flatter people for no reason
Yeah,
or
yeah.
get something.
My own wife was still technically isn't a very flirtatious person. She actually didn't get very flirtatious until maybe a year after we got married. Fun little fact about fun little fact
It's,
about myself, but we got married on January 18, 2020. 2 months later, the pandemic
whoa.
exploded. Right.
Right, right, right.
So we kind of had the unfortunate situation of figuring out our marriage while a pandemic was happening in its first year. So
Yeah.
it was strange, but I will always forever be grateful for the fact that we were able to have a proper wedding ceremony and reception and everything. Had we held that off any longer, it's possible that that wouldn't have even happened.
Yes. So that's cool. I'm curious how I know to ask you a question. Like,
Absolutely.
how does that work? I'm sure you talk about this all the time on the podcast, but how does that work for both of you being on the spectrum in terms of like if you have disagreements or that sort of thing? How do you handle that?
Well, given that we're both on the autism spectrum, that gives us the superpower of never having disagreements. I'm kidding. I wish I wasn't. I wish I wasn't. But that's a great question. Because usually when we have disagreements, it comes this is the same for normal people too, but it comes from the perspective that there's no there's no way that I'm wrong. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So sometimes we have to communicate in a way where it almost feels like we are sharing something about like each about ourselves for the very first time. So when it came especially to the fact that my wife is extremely introverted and I'm very much extroverted. I love having friends over. My wife doesn't have very many friends and almost none at all, to be honest. And that's something that she has felt a little bit sad about. Once in a while,
Hmm.
she can feel lonely. But whenever there are times where I would want her to be with me during social events and longer than she would like. So sometimes we have to take separate cars to my parents' house, for example, or we have to come up with an agreement on when it's okay for us to leave. Um, and I just have to understand that she's not the type of person who can carry on conversations as long as I can. For her, her energy bar is, much smaller than mine. So in situations like those, she's had to share with me just something about herself that maybe she hadn't talked about before. Um, but one of the reasons why it takes a long time for that communication to happen is because she doesn't know how to put words to that part of herself. She doesn't know how to put
Hmm.
words to it. So sometimes she'll get worried that by telling me about this, that will like make me angry or make me frustrated. It almost never does. But she's someone who has had a harder time, sharing the fact that she's on the spectrum with other people. And if the situation is not like urgently calling for it, she won't really share anyway. No one at her work, for example, knows that she's on the spectrum. That hasn't prevented her from doing a good job at her work, and no one has asked. So it's like, don't ask, don't tell. That's where she
I
comes
really
from.
feel for,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry, I just really
Yeah, go
feel
ahead.
for women on the spectrum
Oh
because
yeah.
other women are so dialed in to
Mm-hmm.
body language and the slightest cues and, expecting reactions to be a certain, like, I think there's a little more room for quirk for guys, a little more tolerance. And I think for women, it's more isolating. And it's, anyhow, I respect both of you for making it work. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. There was something I found, wanted to ask you a question that again wasn't even on the list, but I have to know because I feel like there's some much needed context here. But if you go to your Wikipedia page, the picture they use is of you with an accordion on Chicken Street in Kabul, Afghanistan in 2012. What was happening?
Nothing.
Nothing.
No, you know, I
I just had
this
to.
I know it's a great question. I love the fact that it's so out of context, but I I had to MC a concert. I'm a terrible MC. I always tell people that, like, I'm the worst. But they told me to make an announcement about Cure up on the stage, and I was like, "What's Cure?" And then they said, "Well, you know how people are born with different disabilities in the U.S. and they get fixed, like club foot, for instance, and you don't see teenagers, dragging themselves around in the U.S. on the ground,
Hmm.
but in other countries you do."
Yeah.
So some believers in Jesus were doctors, surgeons. They're like, we can heal people. Why don't we do that? I mean, it's just it's something we can eat. We can do this easily.
Yeah.
So they started these hospitals. I wanted to go visit one, and they rerouted me kind of at the last minute. Said, "Hey, how would you like to go to Afghanistan instead?" And I was like, "No," but they talked me into it. And I went to that hospital in Kabul. It was for women and children, the Cure Hospital there, 3 times, back and forth. I could not get enough of it. And so that's why I was there. It was at a time when it was dangerous to be there, but you could be there.
Mm-hmm.
It's more dangerous now.
Yeah.
But I did go to Chicken Street. They had these amazing shops where you could get the coolest, like, medieval stuff,
Hmm.
like from all these different nations that have been through Afghanistan. So I had there was a little accordion in one of them, so I grabbed it I play accordion, and I grabbed it, went outside. Then we had to leave like 5 minutes later because there was a flash mob that was forming because they saw us, and
Oh.
that's how
Oh.
it goes. That's
Yeah.
how it goes.
I'm sorry. At that medieval shop, did you happen to find a replica of Narsil?
A seal?
Narsil, the sword that Isildur wielded to cut the ring off Sauron's finger.
You know what? They had so many in there, and so many different knives and daggers and seal rings, like signet rings, and then seal, like, it was just the coolest. I just wish I could have stayed longer. Each time I could only get there for a few minutes, and we had to get out.
Well, yeah, considering there was a flash mob forming, I feel like being in a medieval shop is the worst place to be in when a mob is forming.
But you can understand my frustration with all that awesome stuff that you never get to see, but you can buy
Yeah,
it. Like,
yeah.
it's like, oh my gosh, just this stuff that, like, and then to have to leave, it's like a nightmare. Like, wait, this is the coolest store ever. I want to stay. They're making me go.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of funny. You actually already touched on one of the questions I had. I felt like I would have been remiss if I didn't mention this, but I was going to ask you to explain to the listeners and viewers what Cure International is and what your role
Yeah.
as storyteller for that organization is. I suppose you haven't talked about that yet.
You know what? This is really weird, but I quit a job at a big network, big radio network. Didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but Cure, I'd already been volunteering for them for years. Cure said, "We'll give you a job. We'll figure it out later." And so I took a job at Cure, and then we decided, hey, you know what? Since radio stations want you to be their personality on different radio stations, why don't we do that? And instead of the radio stations paying you, they have to air spots about Cure. So that's what I do. I'm on a couple hundred radio stations, and I talk about cure on the radio,
Yeah.
and I leverage everything for these hospitals, and I do that because I'm a Christian who doesn't understand or get a lot of religious stuff that's done in the name of Christianity. But
Right.
this I get. This makes sense to me. Healing people and telling them about a God who loves them, like that to me is like music to my ears. So it's the
Um,
most real Jesus shaped thing I've ever seen. So I love being a part of this mission. And then I go out and talk about it, various places, and just kind of get the word out and use my platform for that purpose.
Absolutely. For the last 11 years, I've been working for an organization called Royal Family Kids. Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think so.
Yeah, so Royal Family Kids is a summer camp for foster children, for abused and neglected
Huh.
foster children. It's a Christian-based organization, and I've been doing that for 11 years, most
Cool.
years as a counselor. So I would be assigned one child in particular. He would be my camper all week, and I spend time with him for 12 hours a day, and we get to
That's too
do this.
awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Much respect. And
Thank you. Thank
I,
you.
I this is another big blanket thing. You know, whenever you say people on the spectrum are like this, you can there's going to be exceptions. You know that, but I do find we're a little more into the marginalized or the we're more moved by people who are on the margins or like little vulnerable people
Yeah.
or something. And even animals too, like little animals. Like I there's that's again a big blanket statement, but I think it's really cool that you do that, and I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you're a huge dog person. I do know that.
Oh yeah, well I like all like woodland creatures too, but you're not allowed to keep some of them in your house. So
Yeah, that's true. Um, I wanted to touch on real quickly, uh, your relationship with anxiety. Obviously, Life is Hard, God is Good, Let's Dance. Your latest book, covers that. But how like was anxiety part of your diagnosis, or was that just something you kind of discovered on your own?
not per se. I don't think I'm particularly anxious, but I think I'm human. So we're all bent towards anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
unless we grow to become a different sort of less anxious person. So I have no question grown up in that
Mm.
area where I'm way less needy, way less anxious, able to focus on other people. Whereas when I was younger, is more all about me. Even if I didn't let on or covered it, it's about becoming a different sort of person. So it was never, for me, it was never anxiety in any sort of extreme compared to other people. What I do have, though, and I don't know if this is effectively anxiety or not, but I have this sense of failure
Mm.
that haunts me and chases
Mm.
after me like a shadow, like, and that I've had to battle my entire existence. It's gotten better, but like it doesn't matter. I could do something really wonderful and it wouldn't matter. I would be like I'm a failure. That tape that plays in your mind. There's that thing that it's hard to escape. So that's something I've been beset with since I was a child. Um, and I have to be healthy about it and recognize it's not true. That tape that I'm playing in my head is not reality. I've gotten
Yeah.
I've gotten way better at that.
It's so interesting that you bring that up because I would say that I definitely battle with much of the same thing.
Mm,
I went through a particularly rough period last year where I felt like I was just being dragged through the mud, really, mentally. And it's so interesting because I've even had thoughts like before this interview, even I'm like, will I really feel anything after this interview? Or when I get my
mm,
degree at the end of the year, will I feel a sense of accomplishment or will I feel nothing?
hmm
I've had those kinds of thoughts, and that can be very tough to grapple with when you're left with this feeling that no matter what I'm do no matter what I do or no matter what kind of accomplishments I make, it'll never be enough. And I can see by your head shaking that you definitely disagree with me, although that might just be
That's awesome.
I mean, it's
Man,
probably both.
I totally get it. I totally get it. I do find my experience has been last few years, especially praying in the morning that God would let me be a blessing to people today.
Hmm.
Let me add value to their lives. So I have to prep these radio shows, It's like it's a lot of prep. And I don't always have much to say. But just like just focus on today. Jesus asked or told us to pray for our daily bread. And
Hmm.
it's just today. It's not next week's bread. But so I'm like, Lord, give me content, please. Let me be a blessing.
Hmm.
That relaxes me just today, you know. The other thing is that focus on being a blessing for other people takes the pressure off yourself. Like I don't have to be somebody significant, but that drive that I had when I was younger, I really did. When I just being honest, I think I was really trying to be something significant. And like as soon as I let that go, the pressure's off. And the other thing is to realize whatever job you're doing, you are serving people, and that is a blessing to people. Just because you're getting paid for it doesn't negate that. You are
Hmm.
performing a service for people. You are being a blessing to people, and leaning into that. Like again, the pressure is off, and then
Hmm.
you can see what God does with that. So that's been my thing. Long ago, I asked God to please help me bury my selfish ambition. Please help me not be striving and strafing or chafing for significance. And the weird thing has been my career or platform or whatever has taken off ever since then.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I can't put my significance in that. I mean, I'm ready to lose that whatever I have anytime. Um, but it's so weird. I think God makes a way for you if you just try to be a blessing each day with what you got, and then He'll plow ahead and make a way for you. And I think that's a much less anxious way to live, and it's helped me with my that pressure to be somebody or do that big thing. I'm impressed that you said you're finishing in your first novel. That's a big deal. Like because you're smart, being smart and being thoughtful can work against you because you can be a perfectionist,
Hmm.
and then you never get a book written because it's not the Lord of the Rings
Yeah.
because you can't do the Lord of the Rings, and neither can I. We're not Tolkien. So we have that. I had to fight that perfectionism too because I grew up being the smartest kid in the room and all that sort of stuff. Like, why aren't I accomplishing more?
Right.
And then
Right.
finally letting go of that, I can actually get stuff done. And you're way younger than I was when I started writing. Finally got a book done. So props to you for that. Props. Trying to be cool.
Thanks. Thanks. I was not even planning on bringing this up, but being that I'm 29 years old, I'll be 30 in May next year. I was actually just thinking recently about how I've just been looking back on my life and wondering if I've accomplished everything I needed to
Oh
up
man,
until this point. Yeah, I know that's not exactly the best burden to put on yourself.
it's not.
That's pretty bad. And the ironic thing is, just to kind of give a little bit of a hint, but the put it very basically, the premise of my first novel is about a man with selfish ambition and
Ah,
someone
interesting.
yeah, someone who is very ambitious, very selfish about it, and we see the very negative consequences that has on him. And when I first started writing the book, I just kind of thought, that sounds like a compelling story. And then after I wrote the first couple of drafts, I'm looking back on it, and I'm going, yeah, but how much of him can I relate to at this point in my life?
Yeah, it's
So
interesting that came out
it
when you sat
is,
down to
it
write.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that
love
stuff is
that.
not just random.
I love the introspection on that. And like being healthy mentally means you can think about how you think, right?
Mm.
You can honestly go, okay, you know what? I had some selfish ambition or I have some delusions here. I'm telling myself the wrong narrative sometimes. Like that's really healthy. It's the
Mm.
people that are 100% sure of everything they think that you're like, like Chesterton said in his way back in the day, the asylums are full of people who are sure of themselves. Uh, so I like that. The other thing is when I was set, you might remember this from Blessed Are the Misfits. I had a breakdown. I
Yes, I do
broke down
remember that.
crying. Like I have failed. I have wasted my life. What have I done? I was
Mm.
7 years old, and my mom's like, "You're seven, Brant. What were you? What did you?" And it
I'm
happened again in high school. I broke down. I'm like, "What have I? I've accomplished nothing." Well, that's there's some neurology going on there, but there's also just family trauma or whatever. It's
mm,
we're all a mix, but I love being over that.
mm,
And I got to tell you, like if it stresses you at all to do an interview, you're like beforehand to talk to me, like, will I do? So when I go to talk to people or give a presentation or something, my prayer has been, or get interviewed on TV or something, my prayer now is, God, please don't let me regret something I said or something I didn't say and should have said.
mm,
And he's been really faithful with that. I have to tell you, like I've been kind of amazed for somebody who's extremely self-critical. As I've prayed that, I've come out of a lot of situations going, yeah, I think I
mm,
said what needed said. I don't feel like a fool. I do battle, even if I succeed at something in a big way somehow. I have this reflexive shame that comes over me.
mm, mm,
And again, that has to do with growing up a certain way, but I have to I have to realize that that's what happens. I feel ashamed of myself, even if I succeed. I there's this shame that comes over me, it's like math. It's going to happen, and I feel like, who are you, Brant? And I have to think objectively about that too, and go, that's how I'm wired, but that's not reality.
Interesting that you put it that that's how you're wired. That the way that you're wired means that you feel this sense of shame after accomplishing something. Why do you think that is that connected to autism at all, or is that something
I
else?
don't know, man. It's complex. I, I, I well, I do think I know now, but when I was growing up, it's kind of that's a great question. This is so personal though. But I think in my head, I'm not supposed to do anything significant.
Hmm.
Or if I do,
Interesting.
I'm too big for my britches. I mean, you're in the
Hmm.
Midwest. I grew up Midwestern rural, and it's like, don't start thinking you're big stuff. Don't move to the big city. Don't. So there's a lot of that going on, and then also not being celebrated a ton when I was younger. Just kind of learn, yeah, I internalized a lot of that. So it's a great question. I'm not answering it very well, but I'm trying to be judicious about
No,
how I
it's
talk
okay.
about it.
It's okay. You're doing the best that you can. I tend to feel a sense of shame when when I make great strides in my marriage. For some
Interesting.
reason, like for some reason, I feel a sense of shame if I don't know, if my wife and I have a great moment together, or we have a great day together, or something like that, and I go out of my way to make sure that she's happy. I do feel once in a while, not every time, thankfully, but once in a while, I'll feel like a little bit of a sense of shame, like I wasn't supposed to do that, or something like that.
So you feel like, yeah, you feel ashamed. Like, who, there's this weird narrative. It's like, who are you? Or maybe you don't deserve that or
Yeah.
something. Like, I deserve to be happy or,
Well, that battled with me very hard leading up to my wedding day. The last couple months leading up to my wedding day were some of the hardest months I probably ever went through in my life. And
with shame, you mean?
of shame or or something telling me, something dark telling me that that I'm not good enough for her, she's not good enough
Uh,
for me, which obviously if you look at reality, the opposite could not be more clear. So,
uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, maybe there is a spectrum quotient to this. Maybe there's something about that. I
yeah.
have heard from other people that are, high functioning ASD, like that specter of I'm a failure is very common.
Hmm. Really?
Yep,
That's actually something I've heard less often from people on the spectrum. So it's interesting that you
really.
bring that up. Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's entirely within the realm of possibility that I'm wrong about that, but I have read that somewhere and it resonated with me for obvious reasons. I'm like, okay, that makes sense.
Well, I'll give you
Um,
the length of time that you know you've been on the spectrum and your age. I'd say you're probably more seasoned about this than I am. Um,
yeah. Well,
at this point, I haven't even known it for a decade yet. It's been like 9 years.
hmm, hmm.
So if this is how much I learn about the autism spectrum after 9 years, I can't even imagine what it'll be like in 20 years.
Yeah, well, you keep learning and you keep observing people, and everybody's different, of course. But I appreciate your honesty about the shame thing, and I don't. I don't think we're healed of everything magically
Hmm.
by being a believer, having faith, like trusting God. But we do get to think about it more healthfully.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely. Yeah.
we can spectate on it in a realistic way. It
Yeah.
has really helped to be able to talk to my wife about this stuff. Um, and we have talked hundreds and maybe thousands of hours about all,
Hmm.
emotions and how we process things and just just talk. I did talk to a counselor for the first time, really, a couple years ago,
Hmm.
and he just did 6 sessions, and he was great.
Oh,
Um,
that's great.
have you ever done that? Have you ever talked to a counselor?
A therapist, I
Okay,
go see a
yeah, I guess it's
therapist. Yeah.
yeah, okay,
So
yeah.
if
So that
that's,
was my first time. It was really helpful.
oh yeah. Um, well, again, people on the spectrum have difficulty with expressing exactly how they're feeling because a lot of the
Yeah,
time we don't even know how to label our feelings
right.
or talk about them. Sometimes we don't even understand what they are.
That's
Um,
exactly right. I
yeah.
laugh because my wife has helped me with that too. Like even now, like we're talking about a present day struggle for me to name what it is I'm feeling. Here
Yeah.
I am, I'm a writer and I'm a communicator, and I'm just like, what are the words? What do I feel? I don't know.
Well,
What is
especially as
this?
a especially as someone who loves to to write very colorfully and use different words, and the thesaurus is my best friend and everything.
Right.
But when it comes to trying to express your feelings to someone, you're like, I'm mad, and that makes me sad. It's like that's
I
the
know
best I can come
it's
up with.
just so it's not an absence of the capacity to use the language. It's an honest not knowing.
Hmm. Yeah.
I was part of this guys group for a few years with some friends, and they wanted to do this format where we would check in with each other, and you would pick an emotion and say, okay, we go around the room like I'm checking in as sad, or I'm checking in as frustrated, or I'm checking. And they joke because I always checked in the same way every time, which was overwhelmed.
Mm,
And I
gotcha.
don't even like they're like, dude, can you say something besides overwhelmed? Like I don't know any other like I don't I just feel like
Yeah.
I have a lot of my schedule. There's stuff going on. I just can't keep up. I don't know what's happening.
Or sometimes I'll be very repetitive when I'm writing, a script for the podcast or something like that. I'll be very repetitive with my words. So, I end up like turning to AI and I'm like, please come up with different words for this. And it works out really well because then I'm not saying the word interaction, communication, expression a million times in the same script. Uh,
Hmm.
that can I can't stand doing that anymore.
Hmm. Yeah, totally
Yeah.
get it.
So, what's some advice that you can give to people on the autism spectrum who are young, trying to figure out how to set off on their own and take care of themselves? So what do you think you would tell them today?
Well, I can speak for me.
Sure.
Well, I could say a few things. Number one, it gets better. It really does with age. It honestly, um, the struggles get better.
Hmm.
That's not really advice. The advice I would have, I'm coming at this again as a believer in God who believes that I'm supposed to love people.
Hmm.
So the temptation for me is to critically evaluate the culture and everyone in it. I'm very critically minded. I find much of our modern culture to be incomprehensible
Hmm.
and ridiculous, honestly. That's why a lot of people who are comedians are they're spectrum or at least adjacent because they can see the absurdity that other people don't see. You become very observational. So I see that absurdity, but I still have to love people.
Right. Right.
So for me, I liken it to like you probably heard, the metaphor of it feels like you landed on the wrong planet, like
Oh,
you're from a different
yes.
planet,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
So I look at it like, okay, well, if I went to another country and had to learn someone else's culture and love them, there's certain things I would do. I would respect that. I don't get it.
Yeah.
That it doesn't make sense to me, but okay, eye contact. I don't need it,
Mm.
but this person needs it. They need it. This is what they do. You have to smile. You have to do this. You have to talk about the weather for, at least 37 seconds before they're comfortable with something interesting. Like, like, okay, so I'm willing to do that instead of just being blunt or disappearing into my hole,
Hmm. Hmm.
like and being angry. Like, no, I have to love people. So I'm gonna meet them in that space.
hmm
So
I
yeah,
hate small talk. Oh, I can't
yeah,
stand it. I
I
cannot
know.
stand small talk. A lot of the time when someone is doing small talk with me, all I can think is, this is such a pointless conversation. Like, I love conversations that
Right.
have a point, that
I
have
know.
meaning, that can provoke more discussion. Those are the types of conversations I really enjoy.
Oh man, I
Yeah.
know. I know. And yet we have to do this. Here we are.
It's
So
expected of us.
the
Yeah.
truth is, objectively looking at it, it does perform some sort of role for humans in helping them build trust or some sort of, opening relational something. We don't get it. We don't like it,
Hmm.
but okay, sometimes I have to do it. I'm still not good at it.
Hmm.
I do
Hmm.
not know. I literally read a stat today that said that it was talking about how often people talk about the weather, and the average conversation about the weather is 2 minutes and 37 seconds, it said.
How and
I
why?
don't know. That's exactly my take. Like, how? What are we talking about? Isobars, or we're talking about, cumulus clouds, or like how much info for two and a half
Yeah.
minutes? I
Yeah,
don't,
when the weather is fascinating to me, it's when we have this mass of clouds that are rolling in and they look evil enough to produce a tornado. That's when I'm
yeah.
interested in discussing the weather, when it's
Even then,
happening.
you're, even then, you're not doing 2.5 minutes on it. You'd be like, oh my gosh, let's go, let's take shelter. You're not
Yes.
like, hey, that looks like, I remember back, that reminds me of the front that came across the Midwest back then. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Isotherms? Can we talk, or volcanoes weather? Can we talk about volcano? Can we talk about Vesuvius? Then we get into Roman history and
That's
okay. Yeah,
yeah,
now
that stuff
I'm
is
good.
fascinating.
All right, now we're talking.
Yeah,
If you want to talk
right.
about the great cooling during the 17th century, I'm interested in that.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah, and
uh,
I'm right there with you when you say that like I guess I don't want to say, like us people or whatever, but we have a tendency to just not understand a lot of the culture around us or how certain
yeah,
things work in our society. That's one of the reasons why Matthew is my favorite quote unquote character from The Chosen, because he questions
yeah,
that all the time. Actually,
love
what's
it.
funny is if I tilted my camera just a little bit to the right, you would see my Chosen DVD sets. I'm quite a fan.
Cool, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's thoughtful. Well, I mean, when I wrote "Blessed Are the Misfits," I'm sure this isn't any comedic new ground. I'm like plowing here, but like the big guys the inflatable dancy guys that flap around
At the
outside a car
dealerships.
at the car
Yeah.
dealership, right? Apparently it works. I mean, they wouldn't do it if it didn't work. I mean, there's like somehow for human beings that draws me into a buying relationship with that dealership
That
because
is, yeah.
I saw the flappy guy out there or the tire place. It doesn't make any sense to me, but here we are. Like this is where we are. So I have
Yeah.
to I have to recognize that and not hate it, but love people and try to do that stuff.
But in the meantime, you really wish they would just take those flappy guys down.
Yeah,
Is
or
it
something. I
because
don't get it.
are you like does it make you mad because the flappy guy it feels like the flappy guy is competing with your ticks or something It's like I really wish the flappy guy would stop rubbing it in my face.
I'm the freak, okay? Quit
Yeah.
stomping on my territory. That's probably it. That's probably it. Just
Maybe.
pure jealousy. So,
Yeah. The flappy guy has ticks and people love him. Well, Brant, I had one last question for you, just a
yeah.
funny one to kind of cap it off. But it's kind of a two-part question. When it comes to the Lord of the Rings, which is it, the theatrical cuts or the extended editions?
I like the extended editions, but no Bombadil, man.
No, I know, I know.
No
They cut.
Bombadil. And the other thing is what they do with Aragorn. Somebody had written really thoughtfully about
Hmm,
this, like about he's very certain of himself, more so in the
in the
books.
books, yeah. He goes
Yeah,
through
and like
a lot of doubt in the films.
yeah, and it's like we're not comfortable with a guy like that. And I think that's really interesting. Like
Hmm,
our modern take is that he's got to be different. He can't be this sort of man. And that's different to me too. Just to nitpick a little bit, but that's I mean, still they're majestic, obviously, just wonderful films. Holy moly!
absolutely. And I like how you mentioned Aragorn, how he's much more confident in the books, because like in the books, he gets Narsil reforged when they get to Rivendell the first time. Before the Fellowship even sets out, Narsil gets reforged, and he's already all set to claim the throne of Gondor long before the
Hmm.
Return of the King book.
He
Whereas in
knows
the
who he
film
is. That's
trilogy,
right.
yeah, he knows
Yes.
exactly who he is. Whereas in the film trilogy, he has a lot of doubts. He has, which
Hmm.
I suppose they did that to give him some semblance of an arc. And there is probably some relatability there. It's the doubts that we have for the things that we are meant to be. And
Hmm.
so I think the film version of Aragorn presents a good arc in his own right, but I also understand why people are tend to be drawn towards the Aragorn in the books because we love a man who's confident. We love a man who has no doubts. I guess you could
Well, I
say,
like the rest of the characters perfectly embodied Alex to me. I mean, Frodo himself, like
mhm,
there's plenty of character, but I think this character is designed to like not strictly represent, but like, but is it's designed differently. He is
mhm,
different. So that would be my take on that. Like, I'd rather. I think the book construction is better, and I think it betrays sort of where the screenwriters were coming from. That they didn't
mhm.
think that this could work, even that people could even handle that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, you have the
uh,
little guy who has the doubts, and then you have the big guy who's, very confident. It does
mhm.
kind of offer a nice contrast.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's purposeful. He does know who he is. Like
Absolutely.
we could probably learn from that. We are both of us notorious self-doubters. We've established that, but
Hmm.
we could probably learn from that. Actually, if we believe what we should believe about ourselves, I mean, that'd be a nice example of knowing who we really are. We're playing from a strong hand here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh, well, the version of the character that we got from that 1978 cartoon probably embodied that more than Viggo Mortensen did.
It's so funny. I just found this. I was in like a community room. They have a little children's playroom. It's kind of abandoned, but I was with my son-in-law and granddaughter. We were playing with some toys, and he looks and finds this videotape, a
Uh-huh.
VCR tape. He's like, "This is an animated Lord of the Rings from 1970s." It's like, "Is this good?" Like, just don't worry about it.
Yeah, it was okay.
Yeah.
And then the second part of the question, at what point did you give up on the Hobbit trilogy?
Oh my! After the first one,
Oh, really? You were just done after
yes,
the first one.
I just
Oh.
bailed. Yeah, I could see like this is the tone was off. It was just all
Hmm.
the action, constant clanging action, loud, but like just
It's too
where's the
much.
story, man? Yeah.
It's
Now
overstimulating, right?
the first scene it at Bilbo's was awesome.
Yeah,
That was
absolutely.
great. I was like,
Yeah.
that, yeah, that's okay. Now we're back. And then after that, I'm like, doggone it. Because I love Martin Freeman as an actor. Is that
Oh,
his
me
name?
too.
Yeah. He's so good. And I've been a fan of his since The British Office, which I
Oh,
contend
yeah.
is the funniest series that's ever been made. But yeah. So yeah, I bailed after one. What about you? Did you sit through them all?
I sat through them all. I own them. I can enjoy
That's
them in
commitment.
their own right, but yeah,
Okay.
right. But I understand that it's not very good with adapting the book at all.
Mhm.
It does way more than it ever needed to, and it's more of a Lord of the Rings prequel trilogy than it is the story of the Hobbit, you know. And that's what the Hobbit was it was a very simple story that Tolkien told his children at night, you know. It was a fairy
It
tale.
has that's it. That's why it was so tonally off. It was like this, here's
Hmm.
a sweet little story. Now it gets less sweet as it goes.
Yeah.
Tolkien's kind of bends it towards the darker stuff, but most of the book has a neat sing-songy quality to it that I really like, and that was utterly missing.
Yeah, it feels like a fairy tale, whereas the Lord of the Rings, he wrote that specifically for adults, you know, to tell a
Yeah.
darker tale. So the tones are very much wildly different between the two, and so for someone
Yep.
to try to adapt The Hobbit to just make it feel like the Lord of the Rings again, I get that it's from the perspective of making all six films consistent, but it didn't need to be three films, and it didn't need
No,
to get this deep.
no. Could have been
Not at
one.
all.
Could have been one film.
Yeah,
Could have been
easily.
sweet. Hmm.
Easily. Well, Brant, this was just awesome conversation. I'm so glad that you agreed to do this. So before we go, I just wanted to bring up someone, my mom. She's a huge
Huh,
fan of you. She listens to the Brant and Sherry Oddcast, has read
cool.
Unoffendable. In fact, she actually started a study group at the church for the book, by the way.
Awesome.
Yes.
Good on
So
her. May her tribe increase. That's wonderful.
yes. Yeah, her name is Wendy. So would you mind saying hello to her over the podcast and tell her she wasn't as bad of a
Absolutely.
mother as she thinks she was?
Boy, Wendy, you need to talk to my mom. You guys could probably both talk about all of that stuff. And yeah, I bet you did a great job. I can tell you did. And thank you for doing the thing with the group, the study. I'm honored. That means a lot. And your son's awesome. And God bless you.
All right, thanks, Brant. Well, this was Brant Hansen on the Pancake King Life and Marriage on the Spectrum. Be sure to check my blog out at thepancakeking.substack.com, and we'll see you guys next week.